I'm pretty sure if you're listening to this video anywhere around the world, you have definitely felt the cost of living going up, inflation rates just going up. And for us who are Malaysians staying in Malaysia, we have definitely felt the brunt of the weakening Malaysian ringgit against the US dollar. Last but not least, the Russia-Ukraine war doesn't seem to be ending, and this is all compounding to the bearish market environment that we live in today. Hi, my name is John, and in this video, I want to talk about what I think are emerging trends for our industries going forward, how we can benefit as investors, how do we discern what are noises and what are facts that can help us make better investment decisions. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm not a licensed fund manager of the Securities Commission of Malaysia. Therefore, my opinion in this video should not constitute a buy or sell advice. Please seek the help of a professional advisor if you do need one. Before I dive into the emerging trends, I do want to go over a basic overview of levers or tools that central banks or governments around the world help curb inflation. Now, the first tool is actually monetary policy, and the second tool is actually the fiscal policy. So fiscal policies are what central governments do by pump priming the economy, introducing infrastructure projects, construction projects that have what we call multiplier effects. Whereas monetary policies are used by central banks by rising interest rates and reducing them depending on the economic cycle of a particular country. An example of rising interest rates are shown to you on the top right, where during a recession, interest rates are reduced so that it encourages businesses to spend money, to grow their business, to bring up the economy. Whereas in a bullish market, what they do, rising interest rates will encourage more people to save because the yields are higher. It also reduces money supply, and it also hopefully curbs inflation. Now, in today's environment where we've just kind of recovered from COVID and kind of getting our feet back on the economy, the rising of interest rates doesn't seem to have much of an effect on inflation. And that is what worries Federal Reserve officials today. And actually the reason can be multiple-fold, but I'm going to cover two of it. Now, one of the reasons I believe why inflation cannot be curbed by just rising interest rates is actually the Russian-Ukraine war. And this multiplied the impact of one of the main producers that Russia actually produced, which is potash. And for those of you who are not very familiar, potash is a very important ingredient for creating fertilizer around the world. It is important fertilizer ingredient for crops like wheat and even paddy, rice that we produce within Malaysia. And because of the sanctions being imposed towards Russia and towards the states that surround Russia, Belarus is also one of the main producers of potash. It has actually given rise to the cost of fertilizer. And when the cost of fertilizer goes up, agriculture produce the cost has actually risen. So even with rising interest rates, it is actually not alleviating the cost of fertilizer and the cost of producing commodities, agriculture products. That's the first. So armed with this information and knowledge about potash and the requirements it serves as a fertilizer for a lot of produce around the world, can we actually sift through and use this information to our advantage? So if you do a quick Google, you'll find that Nutrien Limited of Canada is one of the largest potash suppliers in the world, and it definitely benefited. If you see in the financial year end 2021, they hit record sales, record net profit, and record operating cash flow. So this is an example of how using macro conditions such as the war can help us sift through what is important for us and follow the money trail. And if you had invested into Nutrien right at the beginning of the war, I think you would have benefited quite substantially. Now, the second reason I believe that increasing interest rates have not been able to curb inflation is actually a bottleneck within the logistics industry. Now, I don't know whether you're aware, but during the pandemic and the lockdown, Shanghai port, one of the largest ports in the world, had a huge bottleneck of trying to offload and unload goods. Now, in the world today, there's actually a very limited supply of 40-footer containers. Now, these are the backbones of how we transport goods around the world. There's only a few companies that can achieve some sort of scale that have huge amounts of containers. But because of a bottleneck at a particular port, what happens is that if the containers are not being offloaded and reloaded with new items to be exported out, all these containers get stuck. That means there's not much containers going back to its source destination to actually pick up new goods and to supply regions that actually need it. And therefore, because of that, shipping container cost has just risen dramatically. And that actually has a ripple effect on the cost of what we consume, either a toy from China, either food being imported from Taiwan, and all this because shipping costs have just exacerbated. And therefore, I think even with rising interest rates, it actually puts an even bigger strain on inflation, because people or business owners will not be compelled to borrow money to expand capacity, to build new warehouses, to buy new trucks to alleviate the bottleneck within the supply chain. It actually puts even more pressure, and inflation costs actually rise even higher. That's my thought process. So who owns one of the largest logistic shipping companies around the world? It's actually this company in Taiwan called Evergreen Marine Corporation. Now, if you don't recall, in 2021, one of their ships called the Evergiven was actually stuck within the Suez Canal. That actually caused a lot of this havoc within the logistics industry. And in financial year 2021, even with that fiasco, they made record sales, record profit, and record operating cash flow. So again, I'm giving you the second example. When you look at environments or headline information, how do you discern what is important? Follow the money trail again. What are services or goods that are important to a particular economy? And try to find that bottleneck. Try to find where the supply-demand equilibrium is disrupted, and therefore, if there is huge demand, normally prices will follow. Basic laws of economics. So last but not least, a concern for many Malaysians, the weakening of the ringgit against the US dollar. Now, in a previous video, I talked about the record-breaking GDP growth for Malaysia for Q2 2022. The link is on the right here. Go watch it to understand about trade balance and trade surplus. I'll go through them very briefly here. Malaysia is actually in quite a good position because we have a trade surplus in our economy. What does trade surplus actually mean? It means that whatever we export is actually more than what we import, and therefore, because we're exporting more and most of these goods or services are actually denominated in US dollar, we are actually receiving more US dollar rather than having more imports in which we have to buy more US dollar to buy these imports. And therefore, it is very healthy for our country. Second thing why our country is not in a bad position is because our economy is very, very diversified as compared to a country like Sri Lanka, that went bankrupt. So Sri Lanka is the economy is very dominated by exports of tea and more importantly, tourism, which is, while during pre-COVID days, you get a lot of tourists spending in US dollars, economy is vibrant, but during COVID, with a complete lockdown, and tourism brings in about 50% of the economy, that's where Sri Lanka actually had so much difficulty maintaining a very healthy economy. They also imported a lot of food consumption products, and that required them to shore up a lot of US dollars. Whereas in Malaysia, while we do have a lot of food imports, that actually constitute less than 10% of our imports into the country. Now, more details in the video that I mentioned, the link at the right again. But why this is important for us as investors is to understand the confidence within the economy system for the ringgit. It is not in turmoil like Sri Lanka. I don't think it's a very fair comparison with such a diversified economy that we have. And therefore, it is mainly related to external factors rather than internal. And when we know that as an investor, we look at companies within Malaysia that have an export derived revenue with a Malaysian base as their cost. Those are the companies that will actually benefit over the long run with the weakening of the ringgit actually. So to conclude, rising interest rates will not be able to curb inflation in the near term because of the two factors that I described earlier, which is a bottleneck within the logistics industry, and secondly is the supply-demand equilibrium of fertilizers used to produce agriculture goods that we all consume today. And rising interest rates actually have a detrimental effect because that actually scares business owners to actually put in new supply lines, take out loans to actually build new factories and expand their capacity, or to de-bottleneck certain things within the industry. And therefore, over the long run, central banks around the world, governments around the world are stuck in this conundrum on what they can do, because the problem is they have a hammer. And for every problem that they see, they're trying to use it, they're trying to see it as a nail and hammer it in. And as I described earlier, it is not easy because of these different levers that you have to play around with to actually bring down cost of goods. And therefore, as an investor, the volatility in itself helps us sieve through who are the potential beneficiaries. Because if everything is in equilibrium, the supply and demand is in equilibrium, there's no benefit for any particular company to arbitrage and to make a profit out of it. And therefore, as an investor, we have to be conscious or sensitive that whenever there is a huge volatility, that's where we actually make money. Markets that are not volatile actually are tough for any investor, even a trader, to actually make money. Therefore, I hope with this kind of content, you will not fear the market. Rather, you will embrace, upskill yourself to determine what are noises, what are data points that you should dig in to help you make better investment decisions. And I hope this content has been valuable to you. Do consider subscribing to my channel, sharing with your friends, give me a like, and hopefully you hit that notification bell so that when new videos are out, you will be notified as well. So I'll see you in the next video, guys. Ciao.